Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel and part 7 of the Warbirds Replicas Mosquito build. Now that I've been able to finish off the intricacies of the nacelles as you've seen by the previous videos, I can now turn my attention to the rest of the build, namely the rear of the fuselage. So that's the rear fuselage, half the crutch and its foam decking and the tail feathers. So without further ado, let's jump over onto the build bench and have a look at some of the videos that I've taken. Now, I've recorded this introduction after I've taken the videos of the build, and I firstly must apologise for the first section of videos which are slightly blurred. For some reason or other my camera didn't autofocus, which is most unusual, probably down to me. So I apologise for that, but you'll get the general gist of what I'm trying to do by looking at them, and then in later videos things will literally become clearer. Anyway, let's pop over to the bench and have a look at the build sequence. First things first, I've assembled the rear crutch, which consists of basically this long piece here. You get a triangular bracket. Notice it says top at the top, and this gets mounted to the former that is the joining former between this and the front fuselage. It is at an angle, so it's not 90 degrees, it's at an angle because the fuselage, the way the fuselage slopes up at the back. And to that I've got to put the foam pieces. Now I'm just going to, at this stage, stick the lower foam piece in place, mainly because the way I'm looking at operating the elevator and the rudder is I'm going to have servos mounted as far forward as I can, obviously to keep the weight off the tail. So the servos are going to be mounted round about here with probably carbon fibre push rods going back. Again, it's all about saving the weight at the rear of the plane to make the CFG easier to obtain. So the first thing I've got to do, because these are cut, the foam is cut at right angles, you can see here that what I need to do is I need to put an angle cut on the front there. Just hold that like that, an angle cut on the front of the foam piece to match the angle of the former. So I'm just going to scribe round holding it more or less in place. I'm just going to scribe round now where that needs to go. So there, that's the amount of cut that needs to be made on that. So I'm just going to take my razor saw and cut that. Right, I've cut and sanded that. Just see what sort of fit I get. Gonna have to squeeze these sides in a bit as well. And in fact, I'm going to have to reduce the height here as well, because you can see that that top, hold it up to the camera, protrudes above the former, and we don't want that to happen. We want that to be flush to the former. So there's going to be quite a bit of trimming required here by about that amount. I'm just going to, while I'm here, double check the top. And yes, you can see the same applies to the top. That's going to have to be trimmed down the sides as well. Okay, so I'll do that off camera. Right, 5 minutes later, that's cut and sanded, and now with that pushed in, I've got a nice, there you can see there, a nice fit against the bulkhead. I'm going to, whilst I said I'm going to stick the bottom one on and not bother with the top, I'm going to cut the top one as well to suit. I might as well get that done. I know that job is then done and out of the way. So once again, similar sort of situation. Going to scribe the line where that needs to be cut to. Like so, and obviously along the bottom as well. Again, off camera for that. And like the bottom piece now, that's a good fit on the top there. The only thing you've got to watch is these side rails here, or the top of the triangular strengtheners. They need to be let into the foam each side there, otherwise these won't close around. But I'm happy with that, so I can put that piece to one side now, because I'm just going to concentrate on gluing this in. And I'll glue that in, and I'll use the 5-minute expanding foam glue, and I'll put it in and tape it in to position. I'm not sure about the back end, the rear end there. There's a bit of a gap between the end of the ply crutch and the foam deck, but I don't know whether that's intentional at this moment in time or whether I need to block that in with a bit of balsa. We'll see that later. So whilst the crutch is drying, turn my attention now to the tail feathers. Both the tailplane and fin are constructed in a similar way, and then you've got strips of balsa, laser cut, and you've got ribs fitting in between, and then once that's dried you then skin them with balsa like so. So I've already done that, I've already assembled them. I've used my magnetic building board, as you can see, so the next step is literally to skin them with the balsa. So I'm going to use PVA, white PVA glue for that. Don't need to use the expanding 5-minute, although I must admit the 5-minute glue dry time is quite handy. So I'm just brushing the white glue on. The glue applied, just get my sheeting. Now it's not quite wide enough, so there is a separate cut piece here for the front. So just applying some glue to the join. But arguably I could have joined that before I put the sheet on. Yeah, that's fine. Turn it over. and repeat that process for this side. As with the underside sheet, just going to put the top sheet on, line it up. There we go, it's nice and firm on there, which now gives me space to do the fin in the same way. Interesting thing about the tailplane, I was talking to Richard about it, there is no aerodynamic profile on it, and let's face it, a lot of models nowadays you don't have a lifting tailplane. But if you were to have a lifting tailplane, would that in effect compensate for a tail heavy plane? Because if it's lifting in effect its own weight, or it's lifting its weight upwards, so that would mean you wouldn't have to have as much nose weight, maybe. I don't know. It's something that those with better knowledge of aerodynamics or whatever, the forces at play, we're better at answering that than me. Okay, let's plonk some magnets, without getting your fingers in between, because that's the only thing you've got to watch with magnets. They're very attractive. There we go. Leave those to dry now. So that's the tail feathers done. In a little while I'll be able to go back to the crutch and have a look at that. And look at how I'm going to place the servos. Looking at the servo installation for the tail feathers, whilst my the tailplane and the fin got their tips glued to them and they're going to dry. So looking at this rear crutch and where I'm going to mount the servos, logic says mount them at the back near the tail feathers, but no, I want to keep the weight, as I said, off the tail. So I've just cut this ply plate here for the servos. The servos I'm using are these Tower Pro MG92Bs, one of my favourite servos. They're lovely little servo and cheap as anything. I get them from the Pie Hut. They're not sponsoring me, so this is a free advert for them. The Pie Hut, £8 a time. They're 19 gram servos. I could go with a smaller one, I suppose, a 5 gram, but I like these servos, they're nice. So they'll just pop in there like so. Obviously one for the rudder, one for the elevator, like that. Now yes, I know that by putting them like this, I'm not going to be able to service them once the top decking is in place. But if I have to replace the servos, other than servicing them through the front, which obviously means it's very difficult to get at the screws, so what I'll have to do is just drill a couple of holes in this decking here to put a screwdriver down to get to the screws in there. A small hardship. Now the great thing is, with the transmitter already set up and bound with the receiver to do the S-bus as I did the other day, I can now use my receiver to center the servos rather than using a separate device. This way I know I'm going to get an accurate positioning for the center of the servo travel. So before I fit the servo arms on, I'm just going to connect the receiver up. Just going to check which channels. So I was on elevators 2, rudder 4. So if I look at 2 and 4, that's 2, and that's 4. Let's apply a little bit of power to that. So hopefully that one's operating and that one's operating. So now I know that if I put the servo arm on there, that's my rudder, and if I do the same with the other one, so I've now got the arms, I've moved that, turned that one round because I want them pointing in the middle so that it's easier to get at the connections through there. And obviously the control push rods are going to move down here to wherever the outlet will go, and I'll pin them in place. So now I've got full range of movement there, full range of movement, and that's in the center. I can now screw those in position. The next thing I've got to decide on is the push rods that go through from the servos to the tail feathers. So here's one coil of, I'm just going to weigh them to see what the difference is. This is one coil of the small size snake, inner and outer, and let's just put a bit of wire to represent the wire that would be required as the joiner at each end. That comes out at 16 grams. Traditional balsa, so let's say we've got 2 of those. 2 of those for each end. I've got 1 length of balsa dowel here, which I think would be absolutely fine. Let's just see what they weigh in at. So that's 14 grams. So 16, 14, and then carbon. There are my solder extensions I need at the end to connect to the clevises. And I've got my carbon rod with plastic outer. About 9.5 grams. So 16, 14, 9.5. So that's quite a considerable saving. 5 to 6 grams saving by using carbon push rod. So obviously I'm going to go with that. One thing I've done, I've just reversed the servo so the arm is in the forward position rather than the rear position, and again that's so that I've got an opportunity to get my hand in there to get to the clevises or along those pliers. It's easier to get at it with the top decking in place. I can still get at that to get to those. Again, I'm still not going to stick the top decking on because I need to sort out exactly, I need to understand exactly where my pushrod line's going to lie, because I may need to make up some blocks for the outer tube to hold it rigid. So I don't know about that yet. So the tail feathers need to be put more or less in place so I get a good idea of how that's going to go. Right, on to the next thing. Well, to support the tail feathers, because the tailplane itself sits about here in relation to the fuselage, so there's an assembly which needs to go in place first of all, and I've just been laminated balsa pieces here, and then to complete the laminations you've got some thin ply which goes like so, like that, and then over the top there, and then that laminated lump slides in to the back of the crutch, the slots there going over the crutch line. So I've just got to glue this lot together. I've glued the balsa pieces together, but I haven't put the ply on, which I need to do next. I will need to make a recess in the polystyrene, in the foam, because that block sits, if I can just wiggle that into place to show you, there you can see that block sits in effect to about there, so I need to cut a slot out of the bottom of the foam decking. So I'm going to do that next, at the same time as gluing these together. Now the rear tail block, which is the piece that I was just showing with the balsa sandwich between two pieces of ply, thin ply. And we've got to be aware of various things when we're putting this together. The reason why the balsa pieces are cut in half is because the fin post goes down between the ply outer sheets through the balsa and goes through the hole that's in the tailplane. So it comes down and it sits down through there like that. So that's the first thing to be aware of. You may need to trim the balsa blocks, the inner part of the laminate, to allow for the fin post. But on top of that, you also have to make allowance for the rear tail wheel, call it tail wheel, steering, rudder control arm, because that goes through the block, that sticks in the rudder, and that's the control arm for the clevis for your push rod. So in order for that to fit, the hole in the tailplane has to accommodate this sleeve coming through, and as with the kit it's only big enough for the fin post, so I've opened out a little hole there so that when this goes through it can sit like that with the fin post in front of it. And likewise you have to make due allowance for that in the inner balsa blocks of the laminate to allow that to pass through. The other thing you've got to be aware of is that the way the sequence of operation or assembly works is that the tailplane has to be fitted in this before the fin is put down through. Obviously, really, because the fin post goes through that. So in order for everything to sit right in the fuselage, I mean, Eric put me onto this. He assembled all of his before he assembled it on the fuselage, and I'm going to do the same thing. Before I slot it onto here, I'll have the tailplane mounted in the block with the fin in place, and I can set all those perpendicular before I then slide it onto the fuselage, and I think that's a good idea. So that's what I'll do. So at the moment I've just got the one outer ply covering being stuck to the balsa inner. Once that's in place, I can then put my rudder and steering tube in place in there. I can then mount the tailplane, making sure that the elevator torque rod is put in place as well. And once again, you may have to make a slight recess for that in the ply cheeks laminates. So that will go in place with the torque rod. Then I'll fit the fin, make sure everything is square, and then leave that to dry before I assemble the whole lot in place on the fuselage. It also means that covering of the tail feathers will take place after I've mounted them, which isn't a great problem. Now, before fitting the tailplane, I've sanded it to profile, rounded it there. Similarly, I've done the fin, the profile on that, and also I did the rudder at the same time so that I can get the correct profile on the top of the fin. It's a lot easier to do that, obviously, before mounting it on the fuselage. Of course, in my haste to put everything together, what I wasn't thinking about was the fact that if I put the steerable tail wheel in place, how the hell do I slide the elevator through? So it's got to be a situation where this has got to be assembled. You can't just push that through because obviously the bend on the top of it. So I've had to make a bit of a slot in the top and the bottom there so that I can just wiggle that in to fix it. But I can't do that until the tailplane's in place. So that's the next job. That's got to be glued in place, making sure that it's dead upright. What I could do is put that alongside my table there, because I know that's right angles, and glue that in place like so. And that's probably what I'll do. Just move the table over to here and hold it in place with the weights, and that's going to be against there, and that should stick quite nicely. I'm going to use the 5-minute lumberjack glue on that, because any slight gaps there may be, it will fill. Hopefully it won't fill my slots that I've made for my steerable tail wheel. Anyway, and of course the other thing I've got to remember to do is to put the torque wire in for the elevator. So move it down to get the torque rod in place, slide it back up so that it captures it, and then wiggle that backwards and forwards, which will make sure that I've got a good amount of glue. That looks good. Push that in place like that. Looks better. That's good. And also check, it's very difficult this one, because there's not a lot to be going on. That looks good though, there. So final check, move that in place. Excellent, good. I'll let that dry now. And once that's dry, I can then push my undercarriage through, my tail wheel through. And finally, I can, now that this tailplane has gone off, using that slot that I've cut in the core, the balsa cores, I can feed the tail wheel up, stick the fin in place. Got the glue in place, so let's just push this home, trying not to get glue on my control surface. And again, to make sure this is at level and 90 degrees, or perpendicular, or level with, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to put it on the board like so, and put my magnets on top, there and there, and that will hold it. And of course, whilst all that's drying, I've taken the opportunity to stick eventually the fuselage subframe onto the wing. So that completes that. Well, there you have it. This completes the build 7 in the sequence of the Mozzie build. Got a lot done in this build. Obviously, yes, to do with the rear of the fuselage and the tail feathers, but it's a lot of construction work done, which is great news, because that's then the springboard for more or less completing the build on the Mozzie, which will be in the next 2 videos, I'm guessing. Anyway, I'll wrap this one up now. Notice I'm sporting the latest headwear by my darling wife. She is very keen to make sure I don't get a cold head when I'm working outside, so she rattles off the headgear for me, more or less a new one every week, but we'll see what the next one has to bring. Anyway, enough of that. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Remember, thumbs up down below, and also any comments put in the comments column, and I'll get back to you when I can. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.